Alright, welcome to this video where you're going to learn how to play every chord and read every chord symbol you'll ever see in music by learning 7 systems of thinking. First, what are chords? They're the harmonic foundation for most Western music and help create the overall mood and emotional impact of a piece. More specifically, they're a structured collection of notes used in music to convey harmony. For example, in a song you usually have a singer singing the melody, and the rest of the band playing the notes that make up the harmony, playing the chords. Professional musicians use this knowledge to read a special type of music called lead sheets. Lead sheets give you the melody and the harmony, the chords. These symbols represent different chords. You can then read the melody line, and add the harmony below the melody by playing the notes of the chords. Learning the chords also helps you read regular sheet music faster. Popular music you buy at a music store typically includes the regular sheet music with the notes for the right and left hand, as well as the lead sheet type music above it with the melody and the chords. Being able to read the chords will help you understand how the composer wrote the sheet music, which helps you read it faster. Also with this video, I created the Chord Formulas Handbook, a quick reference guide to help you become an absolute master at playing and reading every chord and chord symbol, as well as take your first steps into chord style piano playing. Click up here to download the free handbook, or click the link in the video description below. Alright, for the super beginners, we're going to start with the concept of notes and build from there. If you already understand this concept, feel free to skip to this timestamp. Alright, first, the concept of notes. On the keyboard here, notice we have a pattern of 2 and 3 black notes. So 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, all the way up and down the keyboard. Around those 5 black notes, there are 7 white notes. So in total, we have 12 unique notes, and these 12 notes repeat up and down the keyboard. Let's learn these notes. So the 7 white notes are each a letter of the alphabet. So the first note here before the 2 black notes, this is the letter C. And if we go up the keyboard to the right, we're going up consecutive letters. So after C is D, then E. So around these 2 black notes, we have C, D, E. And then after that, we go to F, right in front of the 3 black notes, then G, and then right at G it flips back to A, and then B, and then look, we're back at C right before the 2 black notes. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back at C. Now the black notes. Notice that every black note is between 2 white notes. So the black note here is between a C and a D. So this black note can be called a C sharp or a D flat. Every black note has 2 names. Flat means below, sharp means above. So this note is below D, so it's called a D flat. This note is also above C, so it's called a C sharp. And these are the flat and sharp signs. Alright, so now you know notes. The next concept we want to learn are called intervals. Intervals are 2 notes or the distance between 2 notes. If I have 2 pennies here, I can have a narrow distance or a very wide distance. Same on the keyboard, I can have an interval with a very narrow distance or a very wide distance. The interval distance is measured in the number of keys. So from one key to the very next key, that's called a minor second interval. Now black and white keys look different, but they're all equal. They each count as 1 key. So from here to here, this is also a minor second distance. That's a minor second interval. So is here to here. That's also a minor second. This distance of 1 key to the next, These are minor second distances, minor second intervals, and they're also called half steps. The next in wideness we have after a minor second is a major second interval. This is also called a whole step distance. Notice with a major second, we have one key between our two notes. So this is also a major second because it has one key inside. Now after our minor second and major second intervals, we have what's called a minor third that has two keys inside, and a major third which has three keys inside. The next distances, the next intervals, have unique names. So we have a perfect fourth, a tritone, and a perfect fifth. After that, it goes back to that pattern of minor, major. So we have a minor sixth interval, then a major sixth interval, then a minor seventh interval, then a major seventh interval, then finally we have an octave. This is from C to C. So when you go from one unique note to the next unique note, that's an octave, right? This is A to A. This is also an octave. All right, so now you know notes which are singular, intervals which include two notes. Now we finally get to chords which are three or more notes. There are two systems to construct all our standard basic chords. The first system we're going to learn is the spatial system, looking at how the notes of the chords are spaced out by intervals. First, we have major and minor chords. A major chord is a major third interval like that, so we have three keys, plus a minor third interval. See how we have two keys inside? So we have 3 plus 2, so that creates a major chord. And since we have C at the bottom, it's a C major chord. A minor chord is the reverse, so you have a minor third, which has two keys inside, and a major third, which has three keys inside. Okay, so now let's play an A major chord. So first we find A, then we need a major third, right? We have 3 inside. Then we need a minor third, so we have 2 inside. So now we have an A major chord. If we want to make this an A minor chord, all we have to do is lower the middle note. Because now we've shifted that middle note over, so now we have 2 here and 3 here. A minor third plus a major third. And if we move it back up, now we have 3 again here and 2 here. All right, so our major chord is a major third plus a minor third. And if we have a major third plus a major third, this is called an augmented chord. So 2 major third intervals is an augmented chord. 2 minor third intervals, this is called a diminished chord. These 4 chord types, major, minor, augmented, and diminished, are called triads. Tri means 3, so these are 3-note chords. Now let's learn the chord symbols for the triad chords. Here are all the chord symbols for these chords. You'll notice here that there are multiple ways to write a chord. This is because chord symbols have evolved over time and no standard way of writing symbols has ever been set. If you see just the letter alone like this, that always means it's a major chord. So if you see a C, it's a C major chord. If the letter is followed by an M, a capital M is major and a lowercase m is minor. You'll also see the chord names shortened like this. And you'll see these symbols. A triangle means major, a minus sign means minor, a plus sign means augmented, and a little circle means diminished. And don't worry if you forget all these symbols. Inside the free Chord Formulas Handbook, I organized a complete list of chord symbols for you, which you can reference anytime. All right, so now that you've learned the 3-note chords, let's learn the 4-note chords. The 4-note chords are the 3-note chords plus an extra note. Now the first 4-note chord to learn is our major 7th chord. We can say that a C major 7th chord is a C major triad with a major 7th interval. So we're playing the C major triad and adding the note a major 7th interval above the C. Remember all of our interval distances? To figure out the note a major seventh interval above the C, you don't have to count all the way up. You don't have to do. Instead of that, you can count the other way. So we have an octave, 2 Cs, and the major seventh interval is just one key from this top C. So octave, major seventh. And if we go one more, then we get to our minor seventh. So our C major seventh chord is our C major triad with a major seventh. Now this leads us to our next chord, which is our C dominant seventh chord, and that's a C major triad with a minor seventh interval. So octave, major seventh, minor seventh. Okay, so here's a summary of what we've learned so far. We have our 4 triads, major, minor, diminished, and augmented, each with a different combination of major and minor thirds. Uppercase M means major, lowercase m means minor. We've also taken that major triad, that major chord, and added a major seventh interval to get a major seventh chord, and a minor seventh interval to get a dominant seventh chord. We can now do the same with the minor chord. A minor chord with a major seventh interval is called a minor major seventh chord. The name describes it well. It's a minor chord with a major seventh, a minor major seventh chord. A minor chord with a minor seventh interval is called a minor seventh chord. So not a minor minor seventh chord. You can just say a minor seventh chord. With the diminished triad, we can add a minor seventh to get what's called a half diminished seventh chord. To get a full diminished seventh chord, which we just call a diminished seventh chord, we play our half diminished seventh, and then we lower that top note one more key. So you could say that this is a C diminished triad with a major sixth interval. But a better way to think of it is 3 minor thirds. Because remember, our diminished chord is made up of 2 minor thirds, 1, 2, 1, 2, and now we're just adding another one on top, 1, 2. So a diminished seventh chord is 3 minor third intervals. Lastly, an augmented chord with a minor seventh interval is called an augmented seventh chord. So these are our seventh chords. Now let's learn the chord symbols for the seventh chords. Since our seventh chords are primarily a triad plus a minor or major seventh interval, seventh chord symbols are our triad symbols plus a minor or major seventh interval symbol. For example, here's a C minor triad, a C with a lowercase m. A C minor seventh chord adds a minor seventh interval, so we add a 7. Just a 7 alone means a minor seventh interval. The C minor major seventh chord has a major seventh interval, so we write major 7 in parentheses. Capital M means major. So we have our triad symbols and our seventh interval symbols. So here's all our triad symbols again. To our C minor triad symbols, we can add 7s to create C minor seventh chords. Again, the 7 alone means a minor seventh interval. And also add the different symbols for major 7 in parentheses to create C minor major seventh chord symbols. Capital M7, MAJ7, and the triangle major sign 7. Next, our augmented seventh chord is an augmented triad with a minor seventh interval, so we just add 7. Our major triad can be used to create a major seventh chord and a dominant seventh chord. The dominant seventh chord has a minor seventh interval, so we can add 7 after our major triad symbols. However, adding a 7 after these major triad symbols is confusing. These chord symbols say C major 7, which makes you think of this, not this. So we actually make these chord symbols our major seventh chord symbols. This actually makes sense if instead of looking at the symbols like this, major triad symbols with a 7, we look at it like this, the letter C indicating a major triad with major seventh interval symbols. Same as over here, but without the parentheses. Less to write. Lastly, from our diminished triad, we can create a half diminished seventh chord and a diminished seventh chord. For our diminished 7th chord, we just add 7s after our diminished triad symbol. So this is an exception to our rule that a 7 means a minor 7th interval. For our half diminished 7th chord, we have a special symbol. It's the diminished chord circle symbol with a slash through it. So this means a C half diminished 7th chord. All right, so these are our 7th chord symbols. Our major, minor, and augmented triad symbols with a minor 7th interval symbol, just the 7. Our major triad and minor triad symbols with major 7th interval symbols. Our diminished 7th chord symbols, which break the rule of the 7 meaning a minor 7th interval, and our special half diminished 7th chord symbol. All right, so we just finished learning the spatial system of playing our standard basic chords, how chords are spaced out by intervals. We had our triad chords spaced out by major and minor thirds, and our 7th chords with triads and major and minor 7th intervals. The second system of how to play all our standard basic chords is the major scale degree system, thinking of each note of the chord as a degree of the major scale. Here's the C major scale. A scale is an ordered sequence of notes. Notice that the C major scale is just all 7 letters, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you're back at C. So it's just all 7 letters with that first note repeated. Let's try the A major scale. So here's A, and then here's the A major scale. Now notice it's the same thing. All 7 letters are present. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then back to A. It's just that here, the C, the F, the G are sharped. Every major scale is playing all 7 letters. The scales just differ in which letters are sharped and flatted. The F major scale, starting on F here, is just F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and notice here that the B is flatted. What all major scales have in common is they're all spaced out the same way. This is the major scale formula. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Remember, a whole step is a major second interval. So from 1 key and then 2 keys up. So you have 1 key inside. And a half step is a minor second interval, just 1 key to the next. You can start on any note and use this formula to create a major scale. So starting here on C, we have a whole step, and then another whole step, and then here it changes to a half step, so we just go to the next key, and then after that we have a whole step, then another whole step, then another whole step, and then finally we have a half step, so from just 1 key to the next key. I can start on any key on the keyboard, use that formula, and I'll have a major scale. Now let's try B flat. So here's a B. Flat means below. So here's our B flat. And now we start on our B flat. Now we have a whole step up, another whole step, now a half step, now a whole step, another whole step, and then finally we have a half step. Since there are 12 unique notes, 7 white notes, and 5 black notes, we have 12 starting places to apply the formula, so we have 12 major scales. Here are the 7 major scales starting on a white note. And then here are the 5 major scales starting on a black note. Each of those scales is spaced out the same way with that major scale formula, and each of those scales has 8 notes, 8 scale degrees. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now here's how you create chords from scale degrees. So here's our C major scale again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now when you play the first, third, and fifth scale degree of a major scale, you get a major chord. So our major chord is 1, 3, 5. If you play 1, 3, 5 of a C major scale, you get a C major chord. Same if you played 1, 3, 5 of an A major scale, you would get an A major chord. Now to create the other chords, we sharp and flat scale degrees. So to play a minor chord, all we do is we flat the 3. So we're taking that 3 and moving it down a key. We're flatting it. So now we have 1, flat 3, 5. Our C diminished chord is 1, flat 3, flat 5. So 1, flat 3, flat 5. Our augmented chord is 1, 3, sharp 5. So sharp means we're raising it up a key. So this is 5. This is sharp 5. Now say we want to play A chords. So here's our A scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our A major chord is 1, 3, 5. Our minor chord is 1, flat 3, 5. Our diminished chord is 1, flat 3, flat 5. And our augmented chord is 1, 3, sharp 5. So we're just taking the first, third, and fifth scale degrees of the scale and flatting and sharping scale degrees. The first scale degree is called the root of the chord. So the root of a C chord is C, and the root of an A chord is A. The third scale degrees are called the third of the chord, and the fifth scale degrees are called the fifth of the chord. Now let's look at our 4-note chords. So our 4-note chords will be using the first, third, fifth, and seventh scale degrees. So if we have our C major scale again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is our 1, 3, 5, and 7. So we're going to play all the different 4-note chords now by adjusting the 3, the 5, and the 7, either flatting or sharping. So when we do nothing, just 1, 3, 5, 7, that's our C major 7th chord. Now if we flat the 7, that's our C dominant 7th chord. We can also adjust the 5th scale degree here on the dominant 7th chord. So we can sharp the 5. That creates a C dominant 7th sharp 5 chord. Notice that these 4 notes are also the augmented 7th chord we learned in the spatial system of thinking. The 1, 3, sharp 5 is an augmented triad, and the flat 7 creates a minor 7th interval with the root. So in the spatial system of thinking, we have an augmented triad with a minor 7th interval, so we can think of it as an augmented 7th chord. And now that we're thinking in major scale degrees, we can also think of this as a dominant 7th chord, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, with a sharp 5. We can also flat the 5, so here's us back at the 5. Now we're going to flat the 5. This creates a C dominant 7th flat 5 chord. Next we have our C minor 7th chord, which is a 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. And then we also have our C minor major 7th chord, which is a 1, flat 3, 5, 7. So not a flat 7, a 7. And then we have our half diminished 7th chord, which is a 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. And then we have our diminished 7th chord, which is the same except we're going to double flat the 7th. So 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. So 7, flat 7, double flat 7th. And yes, this is also the 6th scale degree, but usually musicians will say double flatted 7th. So the 7th scale degree flatted twice. All right, and here's a summary of all the standard basic chords in the major scale degree system of thinking, both the triads and the 7th chords. One thing I want you to notice on this chart is the minor 7th and the half diminished 7th chords. What is the difference between these two chords? If you notice, the half diminished 7th chord is the same, except that the 5th scale degree is flatted. The minor 7th is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and the half diminished 7th is 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. So you could say that the half diminished 7th chord is a minor 7th chord with a flat 5. If you remember our symbol for the half diminished seventh chord, it's a circle with a slash through it. Another way to write C half diminished seventh is C minor 7, flat 5, right? Because it's the same thing as that minor seventh chord with a flat 5. These are two ways to write the same chord. These both have the same notes. So as you can see, now that you have a knowledge of the major scale degree system of thinking, you can read even more chord symbols. Chord symbols with scale degree designations like flat 5. So here are the chord symbols for the C half diminished seventh chord. We have the C minor 7 flat 5. Also more rarely, you might see a C minor 7 minus 5. Flat 5 and minus 5 mean the same thing. Other chords we learned also have major scale degree designations. We have our C dominant 7th sharp 5 chord, also called our C augmented 7th chord, and we have our C dominant 7th flat 5 chord. We have our symbols that we've already learned, so we have that C aug 7 and that C plus 7. So C aug and C plus both mean C augmented, and then you have the 7 after it. Then here we can also see the chords as a C7 chord, so C dominant 7th chord, with a sharp 5, or a plus 5. And then with our C dominant 7th flat 5 chord, we have the flat 5 or minus 5. So now that we understand how the major scale degree system works, we can now read chord symbols with major scale degree designations like flat 5 and sharp 5, where we're sometimes thinking of the chord in a different way, like a C dominant 7th chord with a sharp 5 instead of an augmented 7th chord. Additionally, as far as symbols go, musicians may think of the chord the same way, but write them differently with different uses of superscripts and parentheses. A superscript is a number or letter written slightly above another character, like in first, so the ST is a superscript. You can have 5 different musicians write out C minor 7 flat 5 differently. You can have C minor 7 flat 5 with no superscripts. You can have it with the flat 5 superscripted but not the 7. You can put that superscripted flat 5 in parentheses. You can have both the 7 and the flat 5 superscripted, and you can have that flat 5 in parentheses. These are all the same chord, just different ways of writing it, depending on what pocket of the music world you're in. Alright, now you know the spatial and major scale degree systems of playing all the standard basic chords. Ultimately, you'll use a combination of both of these understandings. For example, with the diminished 7th chord, many find it easier to visualize it spatially as 3 minor third intervals, instead of 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. However, as we move on to the next systems of thinking, you'll rely more on the major scale degree system. Ultimately, you gain what's called chord vision. Somebody says play an A major 7, and you intuitively know what that looks and feels like. We just did the first step to chord vision, understanding conceptually what the chords are. Next, download the Chord Formulas Handbook, print out the standard basic chord formulas pages, and experiment playing through all the chord formulas. Going through that process, you'll really start to internalize the chords and begin to develop chord vision. Alright, now we're going to learn the next 3 systems of thinking: replacing, adding, and omitting. We're going to replace, add, and omit notes from the standard basic chords we've just learned to create new types of chords. So first is replacing. Here's our C major chord. The scale degrees are 1, 3, 5. Now we can replace that 3 and play a 4 instead. This is called a C suspended 4 chord. We can also replace that 3 with a 2 instead. This is called a C suspended 2 chord. Both of these chords feel like you're suspended in air and you want to hit the ground. There's a sense of needing to resolve. This wants to come down to here. And this here wants to come up to here. You can also resolve to the minor triad, and you'll notice the sus4 has a stronger need to resolve than the sus2. And for the chord symbols, we just write our C major chord symbol, followed by sus4 and sus2. The sus stands for suspended. Now also, if we add the flat 7 to that, so 1, 3, 5, flat 7, we have our dominant 7 chord, and we can replace that 3 with this dominant 7 chord as well. So instead of the 3, we can play 4. And now you have a C7 suspended 4 chord. Or you can play 2 And now you have a C7 suspended 2 chord. And symbols-wise, we do the same thing. We would write C7 followed by sus4 or sus2. So those are our dominant 7 suspended chords. And one more thing with chord symbols, if it just says C sus or C7 sus, it's referring to the sus4 chord. All right, so these are the chord types where we replace notes. So we're replacing the 3 for the 4 or the 3 for the 2. The next system of thinking is adding notes to our basic chords. First, we can add the 6th scale degree to our major and minor triads. So here's our C major triad, our C major chord, and we add the 6th scale degree. That's a C major 6th chord. And if we have a minor triad with the 6th scale degree, that's a C minor 6th chord. These are the 6 chords. So this is our first new chord from adding notes to our standard basic chords, adding the 6th scale degree to major and minor triads to create 6 chords. And these are the symbols for the 6 chords. If it just says C6, that's a C major 6th chord. And for the rest of the symbols, it's the same. You have capital M and lowercase m, you have a shortened version of the chord names, and you have the triangle major sign and the minus minor sign. Next, as far as adding notes to our basic chord, we can add what are called extension notes. So our triad scale degrees are 1, 3, 5, and our 7th chord scale degrees are 1, 3, 5, 7. And we have different sharps or flats to those scale degrees depending on what type of chord it is. Now notice these are all odd numbers, so every other number is starting from 1. Now we can continue from that 7 to 8 and keep going to 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. And we can extend our chord to include those odd numbers of 9, 11, and 13. So we're continuing going up odd numbers. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. These are our extension notes, this 9, 11, and 13. We can add these extension notes to our standard basic chords, suspended chords, and 6 chords. So for example, with our major and minor triads, we can add the 9. So here's our C major chord with the 9. That's our C major add 9 chord. We can also have the C minor with the 9th scale degree. That's our C minor add 9 chord. You can also have the C sus4 chord and add the 9th scale degree. That gives you a C sus4 add 9 chord. And you can also have your C major 6th chord with your 9th scale degree. And now you could call this a C6 add 9 chord, where we write add 9 just like our last 2 chords. But more commonly, this chord is given a special symbol. It's written as C6/9. So it's like a C chord with a 6 and a 9. So you write C6/9. And we can also have that minor 6th chord with the 9. And here too, instead of writing C minor 6 add 9, it's more common to write C minor 6/9. So these are called 6/9 chords. They have their own special symbol. But generally speaking, when a composer adds 9 to a chord, they'll write add 9 after the chord. Same with adding the other extensions 11 and 13. They'll write add 11 and add 13. Okay, so I just showed you examples of adding extensions to our triads, suspended chords, and 6 chords. Now let's add extensions to our 7th chords. With 7th chords, it's a little bit different. Say we have a C major 7th chord, and then we add the 9th scale degree. You don't write C major 7 add 9. Instead, you would write C major 9. This is called a C major 9th chord. When we add the 9th scale degree to 7th chords, we get what are called 9th chords. Say we have our C minor 7th chord, and we add the 9th scale degree. This creates a C minor 9th chord. We don't write C minor 7 add 9, we write C minor 9. If we have a C dominant 7th chord, and we add the 9th scale degree, this creates a C dominant 9th chord. We don't write C7 add 9, we write C9. So here we have our 7th chords and our 7th chord symbols from before. When we add 9 to all these chords, they become 9th chords, and all the 7s become 9s. Now let's look at our dominant 7th chord again. When we add the 9th scale degree, it becomes a C dominant 9th chord, so we would write C9. Now when we add the 9 and the 11, it becomes an 11th chord. So this is a C dominant 11th chord, and we write C11. Now what happens if we didn't include the 9, and we just had the 11? Then it's not an 11th chord. Instead, we would call it a C7 add 11 chord. So it's only an 11th chord if it includes both the 9 and the 11. Now when we add the 9, the 11, and the 13, we have a 13th chord. So this is our C dominant 13th chord, and we would write C13. It needs to include all the extensions that came before it to be a 13th chord. Now what if we just had the 13? Then it would be a C7 add 13 chord. We have the C7 where it's all connected, and then we're adding the 13 on top. Now what happens if we have our C7, our 9, we don't play the 11, but we play the 13? Well, all of this is connected, so that's a C9, and so we would write C9 add 13. So this is a C9 add 13 chord. And it's the same with all of our other 7th chords. So here's our C major 7, our C major 9, our C major 11, and our C major 13. And this is a C major 7 add 13. Now you may have noticed something. Our first note of the major scale is 1, and so is the 8th note. They're both Cs. The rest of our scale degrees, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, are the same unique notes as 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So by playing 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, 11, 13, we actually cover the 7 unique notes within a scale. If we go up another odd number to 15, we're back at C. That's why we don't have a 15th chord. We already have a C, our 1. Next, we can add altered notes to our chords. This is where we flat and sharp our extensions. So for example, we could take our dominant 7th chord, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. We could add the 9, or how about a flat 9? That's called a C dominant 7th flat 9 chord. We're altering the 9, lowering the 9 one key to make it a flat 9. The flat 9 is an altered note. Another example is how about we play the major 7th chord with an 11. We can now alter the 11, raising it one key to make it a sharp 11. So these are examples of altered notes, altering the extensions by sharping or flatting them. Let's learn all the alteration possibilities. So here's our 7th chord structure, and here are the extensions, 9, 11, and 13. Now these are all the possible alterations. We have flat 9, sharp 11, and flat 13. So just like our extensions, we can add altered extensions to the chords we've learned. There's actually a special dominant 7th chord, primarily used in jazz, where you add all 4 of these altered extensions. So it's a C7, flat 9, sharp 11, flat 13 chord. This chord is called a C7 alt chord, and instead of writing all of that, composers just write C7 alt. This means a dominant 7th chord where you play some or all of the altered extensions. It's some or all because jazz is an improvisational art form. You improvise. Now also what are considered altered notes are the flat 5 and sharp 5. Now here, what note is our 5th scale degree? Well, it's a G, and the flat 5 is a G flat, and the sharp 5 is the G sharp. Notice that our sharp 11 and flat 13 are the same notes, G flat and G sharp. So flat 5 has the same letter name as sharp 11, and sharp 5 is the same letter name as flat 13. That's why some people will also describe the C7 alt chord as a C7 chord with flat 5, sharp 5, flat 9, and sharp 9, instead of all the altered extensions. Jazz is a very improvisational art form, and from my experience, the way they write and describe chord symbols can also be quite improvisational. So in summary, to 7th chords, composers can add extensions, altered extensions, and sharp and flat the 5. Chord symbols wise, this is how I like to write out chords with added extensions and alterations. So we have our root. So if we're playing a C chord, the root is C. If we're playing a G chord, the root is G. Then we have our chord quality, major, minor, diminished, augmented, etc. Then we have a designation of a 7th, 9th, 11th, or 13th chord. And then in parentheses, we have the added extensions and or alterations. So here we have a C major 7, add an 11. So we're adding an 11 extension. Now let's alter that 11. So now we have a C major 7 sharp 11. Notice we don't write the word add with altered notes. Again, chord symbol usage isn't standardized, so it's possible you will see add sharp 11 somewhere. Ultimately, it doesn't matter as long as you understand what somebody is saying. Now, as we've already learned, if I play a C major 7 and then add the 9, 11, and 13, we get a C major 13th chord. Now, what if inside that C major 13, I want the 11 sharped? Then we'd write C major 13 sharp 11. The sharp 11 in parentheses is letting the reader know that the 11 within the C major 13 is sharped. Now, what if I skip the 9 and just added the sharp 11 and 13? Then I'd write C major 7 and the sharp 11 and 13 in parentheses like this. Some people, instead of a comma, will write a slash like this, and you might see the numbers written on top of each other like this. So you have the 13 and then the sharp 11 below it. The larger numbers will always be written on the top. So that's everything a composer can add to the standard basic chords, our triads and 7th chords. They can add the 6th scale degree to our triads to create 6 chords, extensions to our standard basic chords, as well as altered notes to our standard basic chords. Then, in addition to our standard basic chords, we can also add extensions to our suspended chords and 6 chords. Okay, our next system of thinking is omitting notes. There are a lot of reasons why you'd want to remove notes from your chord. The first reason is an instrument's limitation. I'm teaching you on piano. I have 10 fingers, so my limit is being able to play 10 notes at a time. However, on an instrument like guitar, you're limited to 6 notes. A guitar only has 6 strings, so only 6 notes can sound at the same time. Well, what if I want to play a C13 chord? A C7 chord with all the extensions? That's 7 notes. So on guitar, I would have to omit one of these notes. But which one do I get rid of? We need to get rid of a note that will cause the least amount of confusion. Well, we can't get rid of the 1, the root. Imagine how much confusion that would cause if I got rid of the C in a C chord. The 13 is also important because we're playing a 13th chord. It wouldn't be a 13th chord without the 13. The 3 and the 7 are important because they tell us what type of 7th chord we're playing. In the 3 most common 7th chords, the 3 and the 7 are different. In our major 7th chord, we have a 3 and a 7. In our dominant 7th chord, we have a 3 and a flat 7. And in our minor 7th chord, we have a flat 3 and a flat 7. The 3 and 7 really define what type of 7th chord it is. Notice besides the root, what note is the same in every chord. The 5. Every one of those chords has a 5. The 5 does nothing to tell your ear what type of chord is being played. So if we're forced to get rid of one of these notes, it would be the 5. So a guitarist who can only play 6 notes can omit the 5 from the chord and play a C13 omit 5 without confusing anyone. Because we still have that 3 and flat 7. The 9 and 11 are also not as important. This leads us to the second reason why you would omit a note from a chord. It's to make the chord less tense. If you wanted to make a less tense version of this chord, you might remove the 11 as well. The reason this sounds less tense is because the 11 was clashing with the 3. The reason the 11 and the 3 clash is because the interval they create is very tense sounding. Certain intervals are tense sounding, like this minor second. We call this tense sound dissonant. Other intervals are the opposite of tense, sounding pleasing and stable, like this perfect fifth. We call this consonant sounding. The intervals a chord is made up of will determine its sound as far as dissonance and consonance goes. Chords are made up of many intervallic relationships. For example, our seventh chord is made up of 6 intervals. So when we play a seventh chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, we have this interval here, we have this interval here, we have this interval here, we have this interval happening, we have this interval happening, and we have this interval happening. So you're hearing all of those interval relationships when you hear a seventh chord. When you add the 9, 11, and 13, you're hearing 21 intervallic relationships at the same time. So here's all our intervals again. The dissonant intervals are minor second, major second, tritone, minor seventh, and major seventh. Note that there are degrees of dissonance. This minor second feels more dissonant than this major second. The consonant intervals are everything else. So back to our C13 omit 5. What is this mysterious dissonant interval between the 3 and the 11? This is a minor ninth interval. The notes are E and F. The 3 is an E, 1 E to the next E is an octave, a perfect eighth. After a perfect eighth, we have a minor ninth. Our dissonant sounding minor ninth is an E and an F, and our dissonant sounding minor second is also an E and an F. The minor second and minor ninth are counterpart intervals. Counterpart intervals sound the same as far as dissonance and consonance goes. So composers can omit the 11 to get rid of the dissonant minor ninth interval and make the chord sound less tense and dense. In the chord symbols, besides the word omit, you'll also see the word no. So C13, no 5, no 11. The last reason you'd want to omit a note from a chord is to create what are called power chords. So here's our C major chord. If we omit the 3, we create what's called a power chord. This chord is commonly used in rock music. It's a very consonant chord, so rock musicians can add a lot of distortion and overdrive effects to it. You'll hear this chord in songs like Iron Man by Black Sabbath and Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. Notice that by omitting the 3, we omit the note that determines whether the chord is major or minor. Now, I know you're looking at this and saying, isn't that just a perfect fifth interval? It's only 2 notes. Typically, when playing a power chord, you'll also double the root, like this. Besides C no 3, people also write the power chord as C5. Okay, so that's replacing, adding, and omitting. And you can actually do all 3 at the same time. So here's a C7, a standard basic chord. Now let's add the 9. Now it's a C9 chord. Let's replace the 3 for the 4. And let's omit the 5. We can call this a C9 suspended 4, no 5 chord. The next system of thinking is using alternate bass notes in our chords. So for example, we could play a G major chord, and below that G major chord, we can add a B. So we'd write this chord as G/B. This is called a slash chord. The G represents the chord, and the letter after the slash represents the bass note, the lowest note. Also notice the B is within our G chord. It's the 3 of the chord. So we could also play an inversion of this chord where we move the G from down here to up here. In this inversion, we also have the notes of the G chord, just with the B as the lowest note. Composers will use these slash chords if they want to emphasize the bass notes and create a melodic line in the bass. For example, we could have 3 chords, a C major chord, that G/B chord we just learned, and an A minor chord. So C major, G over B, A minor. See how that creates this bass line of C, B, A? Versus without the slash. This descending line that's created from the chords is called a walkdown. It can also be called a line cliché. Next, instead of the root as the bass note, composers can use a different note of the chord to color a chord sound differently. For example, the notes of the G chord are G, B, D. G slash B and G slash D feel less resolved, less stable, so composers can use slash chords for this effect. Now, another way composers use slash chords is to make it easier for somebody to mentally process a chord. For example, you could have a B flat slash C chord. This is pretty quick to understand. You just play a B flat chord and a C below it. This chord is also a C11, no 3, no 5. For many people, B flat slash C is a quicker way to process this chord. All right, our final system of thinking is stacking chords on top of each other, also called polychords. A polychord is written as a fraction. For example, you might see D over C7, so D in the numerator and C7 in the denominator. This represents two chords. It means to play a D major chord over a C7 chord. Do you notice anything here with this polychord? Well, when we play a D major chord over a C7 chord, it's also our C13 sharp 11 chord. Right? 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, sharp 11, 13. So polychords, just like our slash chords, can be used as symbols that make it easier to process a chord. For a lot of people, it's easier to process this chord as a D major chord over a C7 chord, instead of a C13 sharp 11 chord. Now, there are also more advanced uses of polychords where they're used to create complex harmonies. That's out of the scope of this video. But now, if you ever see this symbol, you know what it means. You're just stacking two chords on top of each other. All right, you made it. We just went from learning the notes of the keyboard to polychord fractions. So in summary, we learned how to play our standard basic chords through two systems of thinking: the spatial system, processing chords as intervals, and the major scale degree system, processing chords as degrees of the major scale. We then learned how to adjust those standard basic chords through replacing, adding, and omitting notes to create new chords. We can replace the 3 of the chord for 2 or 4 to create suspended chords. We can add the 6th scale degree to our major and minor triads to create 6 chords. Then to our standard basic chords, suspended chords, and 6 chords, we can add extensions and alterations. We can also omit notes from the chord to make it sound less tense and dense, or to create power chords. We then went on to use alternate bass notes in our chord to create slash chords, and stacking chords on top of each other to create polychords. Both of these systems of thinking can be used to process a chord faster. We can actually view our different systems of thinking in terms of the time required to mentally process a chord. The spatial system requires a lot of mental processing time to see all those intervals. The major scale degree system is a bit faster if you know your major scales. The use of alternate bass notes or chord stacking can further reduce mental processing time for many people. However, as we learned, it's important to understand a chord spatially by intervals because it informs us on why a chord sounds dissonant or consonant. That's why it's also important to understand the spatial system. These are the 7 systems of thinking to play every chord you will see in music. If for some reason you see a chord that wasn't covered today, you'll still be able to reason it out based on what you've learned today. For example, you might see a C add 2 chord. You know that C add 9 is a C major chord, and then you add the 9th scale degree. So you can reason out that a C add 2 is a C major chord where you add the 2nd scale degree. Lastly, we learned all the chords today, but not chord voicings. I like to compare chords versus chord voicings as 2 different chicken soup recipes. Chords tell you the soup has olive oil, garlic, onion, celery, carrots, chicken legs, and water. Chord voicings tell you how much of each ingredient and how to prepare them. Here's the C major chord, C, E, and G. And here's a C major chord voicing. Notice here we have 3 Cs, 1 E, and 2 Gs. And they're spread out in a unique way across the keyboard. In the Chord Formulas Handbook, as a last-minute addition, I actually added a final chapter on the standard basic chord voicings, both triad and 7th chord voicings. In terms of next steps, download the handbook, have fun exploring everything we've learned today, and become an absolute master at playing and reading every chord and chord symbol. Then learn the standard basic chord voicings and take your first steps into professional chord style piano playing. Alright, that's it for this lesson. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in another video.